Hello and welcome to this impromptu episode of Answering Anti-Islam. Here, we're going to look at more subtle anti-Islam rather than the usual blatant anti-Islam, like the Religion of Peace, for example, which is a very anti-Islamic website. So, this blew my mind, so check this out.
I grew up a secular Muslim. Which means really non-religious, right?
So yeah, call me crazy. I was sitting here thinking that Islam was a religion and that you had to be religious to follow Islam and be a Muslim. But, what do I know?
So before I was 20 years old, I probably went to mosque 3-4 times in my life. And being Turks, we're known for being secular, or we used to be before Erdogan. So it's ingrained in Turkish culture that you must separate church and state.
So I am a Muslim. That means that I follow the religion of Islam, and I do agree in the separation of church and state. It's a wonderful thing. I guess if we want to define that as secularism, because that's what really secularism is, it's not calling yourself a Muslim and not actually being a Muslim. I got no problem with the separation of church and state. I'm a libertarian. I love it. But that was kind of a really weird way to get here.
It's a long historic story behind that. But I love it, and I'm glad, and it formed a big part of my identity. But in a sophomore year, I took a class on Islam and by a great Irish professor, funny enough, and he really sold me on the religion. See that these liberals are brainwashing people into believing in Islam. No, he was just a good guy, and he taught it in a way that was really positive. And so I became more religious that year, and I think I was trending in that direction anyway. And I used to fast, but like a Turk, whenever I could, right? But when I did, I started reading the books. And so I started reading the Quran outside of what Professor O'Brien was teaching, because he was teaching only the good stuff. So I started reading everything else, and I'm like, wait a minute, Professor O'Brien didn't teach this part, and this part doesn't sound so good, right? And then I read more, I'm like, that part doesn't sound so good either. Wait a minute, now this part, it doesn't make any sense, okay? And the thing I would run into most often was, that doesn't make any sense. So I was like, and I did the same journey as my dad did. He actually did it a couple of years after I did. And he's way more open-minded. He did it in his 60s. So,
fellow Islamic students, forgive me for having to say this, but it needs to be said for, I suppose we should say, the casual Muslims, and this needs to be said for those who are not Muslims. If there's something in the Quran that I don't understand, I refer to a scholar. If there's something that doesn't seem right, I go back to scholarship and look at what they said, and usually that helps me. I'd say 99% of the time. So that's a big critical step that he skipped, is he's just interpreted it rather than listening to any of the multitude of scholars about XYZ. Not just that, but also understanding the historical context when certain things in the Quran happened, when those quote-unquote violent things were revealed, in what historical context did it happen? It wasn't just falling out of the sky.
And so I was like, okay, so the Quran has a lot of issues, but a lot of Christians in the world, so the Bible's probably got to figure it out. So I pick up the Bible, I start reading, I'm like, whoa, I didn't see that coming.
So yes, as Muslims, we do believe the Bibles have been changed, namely, the Old Testament, the New Testament, by scribes, by people who try to essentially implement their own beliefs, and some of them were pagan, yada, yada, yada. But still, we still hold people like Jesus, alayhi salam, and Abraham, alayhi salam, and Moses, alayhi salam. We still hold them as prophets because we know they were Jewish prophets. We know Jesus, alayhi salam, was the Messiah. The Messiah was a Jewish concept, uniquely Jewish concept. So, yeah, if he had taken, I don't know, a few days worth of some kind of religious course on Islam, he would at least know this. So I'm unsure why he would be so surprised when he would pick up a Bible or, Old Testament, whatever. But let's keep going. This just basically destroys his credibility with me.
I've known it in bits and pieces, obviously, living life and being a curious person. But when you sit down to really read the Bible, you start in the Old Testament because that's what's in the beginning. Boy, the Old Testament is drenched in blood and sacrifices and goats and wars and circumcisions and prostitutes but don't eat the shellfish and don't do this and that. You're like, it is overwhelming in its. Again, if you're Christian or you're Muslim, I'm sorry, brothers and sisters. I'm just telling you what I think. Okay, it just doesn't make any sense at all. There's one point in the Bible where our God loses to another God.
Suffice it to say, I've done about 2 minutes of research using Google and found out that what he's talking about is a heck of a lot more complex than what he's making it out to be. And there are basically a multitude of Christian opinions on what he's talking about, as well as Jewish opinions. And it has to especially do with the way things are translated and all that good stuff. So I encourage the person watching this to just go and research this. It's really quick and easy to do, and I just can't lump it into a 30-second snippet.
I remember reading that when I was religious, going, wait a minute, then why aren't we praying to that God?
So of course, from an Islamic point of view, he would have presumably already known that we believe that the Bible and the Old Testament have been changed. So, there's your answer about that inconsistency. Done.
The one that won. It's in the Bible, you could look it up, okay? And so, by the time I got to this Tower of Babel story, or Babel, I don't know why I always called it Babel, sounds funnier. And I was already teetering on the edge, and it was the straw that broke the camel's back. So if you haven't heard that story, Tower of Babel, humans work together, they build this big giant tower, and then God gets jealous. So instantly I'm like, wait, why would an all-powerful entity get jealous of these little ants running around on planet Earth? And they built a little bit of a tower, who cares? He controls the whole universe. What a weird thing, like that doesn't compute at all. And then he's also all-knowing, so didn't he know we were gonna build a tower? and then finally he knocks it down and he makes us all speak different languages and spreads us throughout the earth so we can't cooperate together. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. Because I thought, well, if this is true, which just seems unbelievable, but even if it is true, well, then I'm on the opposite side. I'm not for a God that separates human beings and makes us fight each other and doesn't bring us together.
So I'm pretty sure all Muslims know what I am going to quote. Allah said in the Holy Quran, "We created you from a single pair, a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other, not that you may despise each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of Allah is he who is the most righteous of you." Subhanahu wa ta'ala.
And I know other parts of the Bible are great. I know other parts of the Quran are great, but it logically cannot be true if some parts are clearly wrong. Then there's something went wrong in the printing process here, right? So these books in their entirety are just not factual. So now, again, I'm sorry if that gives you offense, and that's not my intent here.
So let's just stop for a second and remember that the title of this is something like How to Tell Your Family You Disagree with Them, right? So all of a sudden, this becomes essentially an uneducated atheist pulpit. And I'm not making the connection between the two. Sorry.
It's a long way of answering the question. once I had that peace of mind, then I didn't care what anybody else thought. So I was absolutely sure of my principles and my philosophy and my way of thinking about it. And so that night we went to a fraternity party, because remember, I'm a sophomore, or no, at that point I was a junior in college. And I said, no, wow, I was a senior. It took me a while to have the beer. So I'm getting the story timeline, it's totally irrelevant, but a little wrong. It was actually a while back after I had let go of religion that I built up the courage to have my first beer, because remember, Muslims don't drink.
Okay, that's just a wonderful example of his not knowing, I would say fairly common knowledge anyway, about Islam. I think most Muslims who have looked into fiqh law would know that the Hanafi school originally did allow certain alcoholic beverages, and now they don't. Modern scholars don't, but there are still some Hanafi who believe that consuming certain alcohols that aren't made of grapes or dates, or are a certain alcoholic content, yada yada yada, are allowed to be drank. So yeah, making blanket statements, and it really shows me he's very uneducated about Islam.
I tried it a little bit when I was secular, and I didn't like the taste anyway. But anyway, so I was at a party and I said to one of my friends, get me a beer. And they thought it was a joke, right? So they got me a beer, I opened it and I drank it. They're like, wait, is there a false bottom? What's going on? Is it actually too strong coffee? Did I get that plug in? Kind of. Anyway, and I was like, no, I'm done with it. That's it, I'm done with it. And the one thing that me and my dad differed on for a long time was that he didn't have a talk show. So, and I didn't back then either, but we had a different strategy on how to appeal to people. He would do the frontal assault. So he would go talk to his friends who were also in their 60s and later in their 70s and 80s. He would say, it is all wrong, you are crazy, there is no heaven, there is no hell, it is all junk, right? And I'm like, Dad, you're wigging him out. Stop, no, this is not the right strategy. So, like, he doesn't mean any harm by it. We're all friends, he's your friend. You don't realize you're wigging him out. He didn't mean to wig him out, and he loves his friends. But they were like blown away by it. And so that's why I said earlier to you guys on the political strategy too. If you got Trump supporting family members and stuff, plant a seed, move on, plant another seed, but do it nice and easy. So I took that route.
So he really screwed up this entire thing with the whole religion part. That really kind of debunks his motives for me. And now what he's saying essentially is he's saying plant a seed in people's minds so that way they'll think like you. What if I really don't care if they think like me? What if I think that everyone can have an opinion and that's totally okay, and it doesn't have to be a progressive one or whatever he would want?
So I would just ask questions of my religious friends. So, I mean, for religious folks, you could ask 1,000 different questions. Why? For Muslims, they are particularly, not true for all of them. It's a little bit of a generalization, but at least in my culture in Turkey, if you say anything against the Prophet Muhammad or the Quran or God, they get very offended on behalf of God. So a simple question of, if God is all powerful, why would he get offended?
So this is his own reasoning based on his own interpretation of why some Muslims get upset if you insult Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam or desecrate the Quran or whatever. I don't, given all this other stuff that he's just fudged through, I'm not prepared to give him the latitude to let this one fly by either. I call BS on that one. Sorry.
I mean, why on God's green earth would he care what an ant on earth thinks of him? First of all, he already knows what I think. And second of all, he can do whatever he wants. He's all powerful. So what are you getting offended on his behalf for? And when you say that, they're like, huh. And you say, wait, is he all powerful or is he not all powerful? I'm just trying to understand. When you phrase it as I'm trying to understand, it gets them to think a little bit. So that's my strategy. And remember, like the happiness gym, all of these things are just one step at a time. Just exercise that muscle a little bit in terms of you feeling good about your decision. And then if you want to help others, but don't do it in a way that's confrontational. If you're truly trying to help them, don't yell at them. Pose it as a question to get them to start thinking about it.
The crazy part about that is it essentially insinuates that if you plant these ideas, then you're going to make them come to the same inevitable conclusions. Like, it's just completely scientific, and that's it. That this is, he's figured out the exact answers to life, and if you plant that seed, then you get that exact answer, and that's essentially atheism. For some people, that may be true. For others, maybe not. But I don't think all of us want to make everyone think the way we do. If we did, it would be a really, really boring life and a boring planet.
And remember, all those folks, most of them, if they're in your life, are actually great people who are trying to help with their faith.
I think anyone of any Abrahamic religion can see why I made this. I put it under answering anti-Islam because there was more anti-Islam involved than anything else. But I know other Abrahamic religions can easily rebut this too. So this is kind of the brainwashing that the media is doing, and I really wanted to call attention to it. This is anti-Islam. Please stay tuned for another episode of Answering Anti-Islam.